Hey, welcome to the Summit Host Hangout podcast where you'll learn how to plan, strategize, and launch your profitable online summit. No influencer status necessary. I'm your host, Krista from Summit in a Box, and today we are talking about something questions are constantly popping up about in the Summit Host Hangout Facebook group, and that is speaker agreements. It only took us 106 episodes to get here, but better late than never when covering a topic like this. So today we're going to talk about whether or not you really need a speaker agreement, what kinds of things you should and shouldn't include in it, whether this is an agreement you can whip up yourself or need an experienced attorney or attorney drafted template for, and then we'll touch on a few other agreements that should be a part of your summit as well. Since you definitely don't want to hear me try to cover anything law related, I have brought in an expert to help. To give you some background information on our guest, she's a contract law attorney who helps influencers and creative entrepreneurs who struggle with navigating the legal side of their business. Over the past 6 years, she's helped creatives negotiate fair deals while protecting and leveraging their creative assets with ironclad contracts. Beyond her client work, she also provides DIY contract templates for entrepreneurs needing instant clarity and confidence to legally protect their businesses. And she is seriously such a joy to talk to about all things legal agreements. So without further ado, let's dive in and talk with Casey Handy Smith. Welcome, Casey. Thank you so much for being on today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to talk about this because, like I said, this is something I'm getting asked about all the time, and I do my best. But usually, I'm just go to Casey's website. So it'll be nice to have an episode that I can just send people to. But tell us a little bit about you and your business before we dive in.
Yeah, so like you said, I work with influencers and creative entrepreneurs and really helping them just navigate the legal side of their businesses. My law firm is a virtual law firm. We have been in existence since 2015. And we are a full service contract law firm. So we offer contract negotiation services, custom contract drafting, contract review, have a lot of different strategy sessions and things as well as it relates to contracts. And in addition to that, we also have, as you mentioned, a DIY, a contract template store where folks can go and just download our contract templates, which are drafted solely by lawyers, peer reviewed, all that good stuff. So yeah, all that's over on our website.
Amazing. And we will, of course, link to all the things in the show notes as well for anyone who wants to check it out. Also, one question I like to ask is, what experience have you had with summits? Hosting, speaking, attendee? What does it look like for you?
So for me, speaking and attending. I have never hosted a summit. It looks like such a lofty, I applaud anyone who hosts events in person or virtual because I know so much goes into it. So I've never hosted a summit, but I've spoken at several and I've attended quite a few. So.
Yeah, and I love that because I know you've seen everything when it comes to speaker agreements. Good ones, bad ones, non-existent ones, all the things.
Yeah.
So let's dive in and talk about those. Since I know you have an incredible agreement in your shop, and like I said, I know you've received all kinds of agreements in the speaking you've done, I'm just excited to dive into this. So first things first, do summit hosts really need a speaker agreement, or is that something you'd view as more optional?
So obviously, as a lawyer, I'm always going to say that you need to have a contract, you need to have a written contract, something that's going to be legally enforceable. It should not be optional. And one of the things that I think a lot of people overlook when it comes to contracts is really the practical aspect of allowing you to have conversations about things that you otherwise really wouldn't think about. And summits are definitely one of those things, especially these virtual summits. I noticed personally this year, I spoke at several virtual summits this year. I have some queued up for next year as well. And it's been really interesting to kind of see how folks have merged speaker agreements with affiliate programs. And so there's a lot of things to really consider when you are having speakers come on. And a lot of those things you don't necessarily think about, until it happens, right? Until it's too late, until a speaker is upset or there's just some confusion. So you definitely always want to have a written contract in place from the beginning to help you navigate those sorts of conversations. Make sure that you have it in writing so that everyone's on the same page from the beginning. Because once you have that, honestly, you tend to have a less of a chance of having a crazy, dispute or something happen when you have something already concrete in writing from the start.
Yeah, and like I love that you pointed out the conversation aspect because that's like all the feedback I've ever gotten from sending contracts. There are so many people who are scared to send their speakers a contract, but literally the only pushback I've ever gotten was someone wanting to clarify something and then ask that their presentation not be included in like the evergreen version of my All Access Pass. Like that's it. I've never had someone come back and be like, oh, you sent me a contract. I'm not going to be a part of this event. But
Exactly.
like, I feel like that's the biggest pushback I hear from hosts when I'm like, you should send a speaker agreement. So what are your thoughts on that if you hear someone kind of voicing that concern?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because that's something that I hear from like creatives across the board. They're like, "Oh, I don't really want to bring contracts into it because I don't want to make it weird or uncomfortable." And I always say, I mean, it's business at the end of the day. Like if your summit, if you're hosting this as a part of something you're doing in your business, likely it's a marketing component of your business or something that generates revenue for you. Like it's business at the end of the day. And if the person on the other side of the table has a problem with you sending them a contract, that's probably not someone you want to be in business with anyway. Because honestly, if I'm in a situation, and of course I'm a lawyer, so I look at that sort of stuff anyway, but just generally, honestly, like if someone asks me to be a part of something and then you don't send me a contract, I'm kind of like, red flags a little bit, right? Like, this isn't very professional. Like what's the situation? So yeah, my statement to that is always, I mean, this is business at the end of the day. So you need to always be starting with the end in mind, thinking about how to best protect your business and your brand, your intellectual property, the things that you're doing, so that you don't run into any issues down the road.
Yeah, and something I thought of when you were answering the previous question was, okay, we get freaked out a little bit by sending the agreement out initially, but how freaked out would you be if all of a sudden after your event you get an email from someone's attorney saying you didn't have permission to like use what you were using or doing something like that? Like,
Exactly.
I don't know about you, but that's a whole lot more awkward and terrifying to me.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. That's a great example. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say we've decided, okay, we'll go ahead with the contract. I know I've been on the receiving end of several agreements, I'm saying in air quotes, that have clearly been like written up by the host. So it's like a one paragraph agreement with like a bulleted list of a couple terms. What are your thoughts on something like that versus using a proven template or hiring an attorney to make a full agreement?
So when it comes to folks just kind of trying to write their own contracts, the reason why you never want to write your own contracts is the number one reason why contracts get thrown out, why they are deemed unenforceable, is because they are poorly written. So there's usually, ambiguous terms in the contract. And that's kind of the court's way of saying, like, if you ever got to that point of them saying, like, hey, we can't accept this contract because certain parts of the contract contradict with another. And that's something I see all the time when creatives try to draft their own agreements. When they start piecing stuff together from various resources, there'll be one provision in the contract that says something, and then a page later, something that completely contradicts that other thing. So that's never good because that means now we have an ambiguous contract, and now that means it's not going to be legally enforceable. So although you may be super smart, you may have all the degrees, legal writing is a totally different ballgame, which was something I even learned as a lawyer. When I went to law school initially, and me and my friends joke about this all the time, we were kind of like, well, I guess we just throw out everything we ever knew about the English language because because legal writing is just so incredibly different. Like I said, no provision is an island. Like everything has to be drafted with everything else in the contract in mind and in consideration. And then another thing too, when you're trying to draft your own agreements, is you're at a disadvantage because you don't see firsthand how attorneys, we see like what happens. Like we see how contracts are breached. We see the crazy conversations and things that come up. We send those emails that you were talking about after an event, right? Because now someone's using content a way that they weren't supposed to be using it. So when we draft contracts, we're going into it with our legal training for one, and then we're also coming into it with all of those scenarios in our heads, making sure that we're drafting things in a way to help our clients avoid those sorts of situations. So you want to steer clear of trying to draft your own contracts. You really do, for all those reasons we just stated. But really and truly, like the main reason contracts get thrown out is because they're poorly written. So yeah.
Yeah, when finally got a contract written for my speakers, I had already hosted, I'm embarrassed to say it to you, I had already hosted three summits. Yeah, three summits without one.
Hmm.
And when I read that agreement I was given, I was like, oh, I literally never thought about this or this or
Yeah.
this. So like what you're saying with the experience is just like out of this world, different from what we would ever write up doing it ourselves. So
Yeah, and you guys had a good contract. I remember getting yours and being like, okay, this is like all of the scenario. Yeah, no, like really and truly, because I've been a part of like several summits, and so I've seen a variety of things. But yeah, you guys definitely had a good contract, and I was like, okay.
it's so terrifying sending a contract to an attorney. So thank you. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I hope these first few questions helped you guys listening see that yes, we don't want to send contracts, but we're going to, and we're going to get like good ones that we didn't just like whip up on a Friday night or whatever. So, in those agreements, what do you see as the most important terms to include specifically for speaker agreements?
So for speaker agreements, obviously, like compensation is big, and that is regardless of how you're paying your speaker, and really more so because there are so many creative ways to pay speakers, right? I think especially, with everyone transitioning into this virtual summit kind of world now, thanks to COVID, I've seen a lot of just interesting kind of meshes of how speakers will be paid. So if you're not paying your speakers an actual like speaker fee, but instead they have an opportunity to get commissions from like an affiliate relationship, then you definitely need to clearly outline that. If you are doing kind of a hybrid where you are paying a speaker fee, some speakers require, deposits just to lock them in for that event. So making sure that you're outlining, the deposits, the payment, commissions. If the event is canceled for whatever reason, what does that look like now for the payment that you may have already paid the speaker? How are we going to handle that? So the various ways to compensate a speaker is definitely a big one, as well as presentation materials, right? So if you are doing like a pre-recorded, like you all summit was, Krista, and a lot of the other ones I've been a part of, if you're requiring speakers to create a presentation, outlining when you need to have it back by, what sort of things it should include, what sort of things it should not include. I've definitely seen a lot of agreements now where folks are like, we don't want all this pitching in your presentation. Like, we want it to be something substantive for our participants. So having that sort of thing in there, and then of course, kind of what you hinted on earlier too, is how can we use these materials later? So making sure you're clearly outlining, can you use the presentation outside of the scope of this presentation? Is it something that you can use, like you said, in an evergreen sort of product? How were your speakers going to feel about that? As well as their images, because, most events, there's going to be obviously some promo that goes with that. So how are images going to be used? Can these images from the event be used, after the fact for other marketing, which is always a big one when you're dealing with like in-person type of engagements in particular. So those are some of the kind of high points I would say for your speaker agreements.
Yeah, I love that. So similarly, are there any terms that hosts tend to include that you don't think should be in there, or isn't that something you usually run into?
Not particularly. I mean, because every situation and depending on the event, can be so different. So there may be some terms that don't make sense in one context that do make sense in a different context. I mean, because at the end of the day, it's your event, it's your business. So how you kind of handle your event and how it's going to kind of vary from person to person. So I can't say that I've necessarily seen anything that's like a absolutely do not include. I mean, I've seen some things where it's like, okay, your speaker may not agree to this, so you're gonna have to be, willing and open for that conversation when it comes up. But I haven't really dealt with like just an absolute no to have in your contract.
Yeah, the reason I ask this is like 100% selfishly, because whenever I get a contract when I'm speaking and it has like the promotion requirements, like you must send 2 emails or else, I'm like, really? Does this seem to
Yeah.
be in a contract? If I only send 1 email instead of 2, are you going to take me to court? Like, so maybe it's not like a legal no, but I'm always like, ugh, does not need to be in.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good example because that again just kind of depends too on the event, how you're compensating your speakers. Like, I think if you're not paying your speaker, then that is a bit much to ask that they be required to promote the event if they're not actually being paid for it. But if you're in a context where you're paying your speaker, or your speaker is kind of a hybrid, so I work with a lot of influencers, so a lot of their speaking engagements are hybrids of promo and them speaking and hosting the event. So there's always an element of different promotion requirements in their contracts in addition to their speaking as well. So that kind of goes back to, like, it just depends, I think, on the context and what exactly, the engagement's going to be.
Yeah, awesome. I love all that. Do you feel like there's anything we missed on the speaker side of summit agreements? I feel like we covered it, but I want to make sure there's nothing I'm missing.
Anything that relates to speaker side, talks about IP. I think that's the main stuff. I'm trying to make sure. Yeah, I think we hit on the main things.
Awesome. I do too. And so then there's one other question I want to move into, because you were a speaker at one of my most recent summits, so I got a sneak peek at your answer, and I kind of just wanted everyone to also hear it. But what are the other legal agreements summit hosts should make sure they have in place for their summit outside of the speaker agreement?
So yeah, in that presentation, I talked about website policies. So, as you have people registering for your summit, you definitely want to have a good privacy policy as you're collecting those email addresses and names. You want to have your terms of use that breaks down, especially if you're doing a kind of a VIP structure on the back end. So that would break down and explain, your refund policies and things like that for folks who agree to opt into that type of registration. So you want to have your website policies. You want to have a sponsorship agreement if you're using or working with sponsors. So if you have secured those sorts of relationships, that's awesome, but you definitely want to have a written contract with your sponsors. And the other one, independent contractors. So if you have quite a few people who are helping you, or even one person helping you get your summit together, whether that's a graphic designer for, social media promo, virtual assistant who may be helping you send out and follow up with emails. So if you don't already have a contract with that person, like if it's not someone who's already on your team and you're kind of, outsourcing for this particular event, then you want to make sure that you have independent contractor agreements with those folks as well.
Thank you very much. Just want to make sure everyone's checking the boxes. And if you guys don't have any of those, we will talk about in a minute where you can go and get all of these templates from Casey. Before we get there though, is there a biggest takeaway you would want listeners to get from what we talked about?
I would say biggest takeaway, and it's kind of a general takeaway that I share with people all the time, and that's really just starting with the end in mind. Making sure that you're getting yourself together from the beginning, because a lot of times as creatives, there's a tendency to really overlook the business aspect of doing things. We get these amazing ideas and we want to just go into execution mode, but you always want to start with the end in mind. What you may be doing right now may not seem like a lot to you. It may seem just like a small event that you're putting on, but you want to think about, where do you ultimately want your summit to be, a year from now, 2 years from now? What do you see the vision for this, and making sure that you're setting up that good foundation from the beginning, because you'll be surprised at how some of these things can come back on you, especially when you're talking about using people's content, using people's images. So, I've seen it firsthand, where clients participated in something and 2 years later it resurfaces because someone used their image in a way that they didn't like, or they're like, wait a minute. I've even experienced it where people have used, some of my things where I'm like, we didn't give you permission for this, we didn't send you this, so it's, these sorts of things come up and they happen. So I would say the biggest thing is just making sure you really start with the end in mind, protect yourself from the beginning, have those conversations, have those uncomfortable conversations, because like you said, Krista, it's going to be so much better to have had that conversation up front than to have that super awkward conversation a year from now when someone's lawyer is sending you an email. So.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. I love that takeaway. Where can people go to learn more about you and the templates you offer, connect with you, all of that good stuff?
Yeah, so my website is chandylaw.com, and that is our home base for all the things. So you can go there and learn more about our services. You can schedule our chat with a legal expert call to connect with us. That's where our contract templates are as well. So there's tabs on there. Our podcast is on there. So chandylaw.com is where you can go to get all that information. And social media, I'm Contract Casey everywhere on social. So yeah, you can connect with me. My DMs are always open for conversation. So yeah, Contract Casey on all the things.
Amazing. We will link to all that goodness in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here and sharing all this good stuff with us, Casey.
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. For show notes and resources mentioned, head to summithosthangout.com/106. In the next episode, we'll be chatting about how to sell better after your summit with truly targeted offers. So be sure to tune in for that. Now go out and take action to plan, strategize, and launch your profitable online summit.